Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 71, Wednesday, March 9th, 2022.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and...
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined as always by the Al Michaels to my Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Courtney, I would never trade you for anything.
Well, thank you, and I would never trade you either, nor would I want to trade our opportunity to chat with today's author interview. He boasts such an impressive resume that it's hard to choose where to begin, but let's start with his written work. Dave Bossert is the author of numerous articles and multiple Disney-focused books, including but not limited to Remembering Roy E. Disney, The Animators Gallery, Eric Goldberg Draws the Disney Characters, Dolly and Disney Destino, and his latest, Claude Coates' Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland. But today he is joining us to discuss Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, The Search for the Lost Disney Cartoons, in honor of Oswald's 95th birthday this year. So thank you to our listener Ryan for connecting us with Dave. Fans of Disney animation like Ryan and ourselves are sure to recognize his effects credits with theatrical releases spanning from The Black Cauldron through Fantasia 2000. Dave left Disney in 2016 to write full-time, and we are so grateful to have him join us today to share insights from that portion of his career. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, how are you guys? It's so nice to be on your show.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us, and we'd love to learn a little more about you before we talk about your book. What was your journey to becoming a writer, and what drew you, no pun intended, into writing about Disney?
Well, I have to tell you, and I've often said this to friends, if you had asked me like 15, 20 years ago if I ever thought I'd write a book, I would have laughed. I just never viewed myself that way. But I actually started writing some commentaries for a local newspaper on just community issues. And it sort of snowballed from there. And a good friend of mine, Don Hahn, who produced Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and a whole bunch of movies and directed documentaries and everything. He actually was the one that suggested I do the Roy Disney book because I had worked closely and traveled with Roy Disney for so many years. I had all these great stories, and not long after Roy had passed away, Don and I were chatting, and we were trading some stories, and he looked at me, he goes, you ought to put some of those stories in a book about Roy. And that's really kind of where it started. And so I actually got a book on how to write books off of Amazon, and I read most of it. I didn't even finish that book, but what I got out of it was that I needed to write a synopsis of what the book would be about and a sample chapter. And so I sat down and I did that, and I sent it off to an editor at Disney Publishing, and got a very positive response. And while I was in New York on business, I had lunch with that editor, and she said, we'd love to do this book. And they gave me a book contract. And so when I walked away from that lunch, I was like, happy, but then I was like, oh my God, I got to write a book. And so I managed to do that. And when I turned in that manuscript, I gave them a pitch for the Dolly and Disney Destino book. And they came back right away and said, oh my gosh, we would love to do that book. And they gave me another book contract, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Well, we are so glad that it has. We love adding to our Disney library, and you've made some great contributions. We picked Oswald because I think we each had gotten this for Christmas or different holidays over the year. It had been on our shelf. So when Ryan mentioned that he was part of your Patreon and you were like, yes, please reach out on our behalf. Thank you so much for doing that, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. It was terrific. And when he did reach out to me, I was like, sure, I'd love to do that, and sent you guys the email.
Yes. Well, we're so grateful. So if you don't mind, let's dive into the Oswald book itself for some questions around that. At the beginning of your book, you tell the story about reading an online article about the Lost Oswald cartoons. Could you share with our listeners how this online article turned into the search for Oswald and then a book about the whole search?
It was kind of crazy, I have to say, because at the time I was a producer, creative director, and I headed up the special projects group at Walt Disney Animation Studios. And, I had a fairly packed, fairly robust schedule every day. And when the occasional meeting dropped out, it gave me sort of a little respite of a half hour, an hour in my office. And that's exactly what happened one day. A meeting I was going to have dropped off the calendar. I had this free hour, and I went online, and I happened to see in one of my news feeds that this Lost Oswald cartoon had been found. And by the time I finished reading that article, and it basically was saying that it was found at a private archive in England, and it was going to be auctioned at an auction house in Hollywood. And right about the time I finished that email, I got, that article, I got an email from then president of Disney Animation, Ed Catmull, and he had a question about Oswald. Somebody in the company had sent him a note with a question about Oswald, and so he turned around and forwarded it to me for the answer. And I responded to his email, and I said, oh, and by the way, this Lost Oswald cartoon was found, and it's going to be auctioned off. I think the company should buy it so that we can repatriate that Oswald, because it was one of the Lost Oswald. It was actually Hungry Hobos. And it was one of the Lost Oswald cartoons, and he wrote back and he said, "Wow, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Let me go see if I can secure some funding for it." And he did, and then I went over to the auction house and I inspected the print, and wound up purchasing it at auction, and then we did a digital scan of it and cleaned it up. So, and that really sort of set me on this path of thinking, well, if that one surfaced, I wonder if there's other Lost Oswalds out in the world sitting in an archive someplace, and maybe we can go and shake the trees around Europe and see if we can find some more. And that's really what happened. I wound up bringing on a consultant named David Gerstein, and David was sort of plugged into the silent cartoon world, and knew a lot of archivists, film archivists across the globe. And so we brought him on, and as a paid consultant to go poke at various archives, and we started finding other cartoons, which was really fantastic, because when Oswald first came back to the Walt Disney Company, there was only 13 of the 26 titles that came with it from Universal. They didn't have copies of all of them. They only had copies of about 13. And even that was a push, because Universal actually didn't have them all. There was a couple sitting with some collectors. So we managed to cobble together the 13. And then the rest were sort of lost to history until Hungry Hobos had surfaced. And then after that, we wound up finding another 6 or 7 of them. I think I want to say we're at like 19 and a half, because we found a portion of Neck and Neck, which I authenticated a couple years ago. That surfaced in Japan, of all places. So there's still more to be found, without question. And, I hope that we will, and I'm pretty confident that some of these will surface at some point.
It's such an interesting journey to me how an online article at lunch led to this entire journey of bringing Oswald back to the company. That's so fascinating to me.
Well, something, it wasn't about bringing Oswald back, because Oswald had already been repatriated to the
finding
company
all those other cartoons.
Yeah. I mean, you got to give Bob Iger, the former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, a tremendous amount of credit for bringing Oswald back it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing with Universal in, trading Al Michaels and, all of this stuff. But it was very shrewd of him to have Oswald on his radar. And the folks over at Universal, most of them didn't even know that they even owned Oswald. So it was sort of a no-brainer to repatriate the 26 cartoons that Walt Disney was associated with. And so, again, Bob Iger gets a lot of credit for that. As far as trying to track down the other ones, again, that's kind of the story of my life as far as the serendipity of some of these situations, where, an article sparks it starts the dominoes, if you will. And that's really what happened here. And ultimately, as we started, uncovering and bringing back some of these lost cartoons to the film studio, it just dawned on me that there needed to be a book about the lost cartoons, and really these 26 Oswald cartoons, because there was no definitive book on Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. So
it's so true. Courtney and I had, when we were talking last episode that we were going to read your book and talk to you next, that we both had said we've done, both of us chose in elementary school, when you do that like first biography book report, we both chose Walt Disney. So we knew Oswald, but he was only a couple paragraphs or
maybe
a
footnote. Sentence, if that.
Yeah, I mean, that was, that was really kind of the case. It was getting to a place where Oswald was sort of lost to history. And that also, when Walt did those first 26 Oswalds, he didn't actually own the character. And his producer owned the character with Universal, and the producer took it away from him, gave it to someone else to do. The producer set up his own little Oswald studio and hired a lot of Walt's artists away from him to do the Oswald cartoons instead of dealing with Walt. And because of that situation, Walt and Ub Iwerks created Mickey Mouse. And that sort of is like the rest is history, right? Because when Mickey debuted in Steamboat Willie with sound, it was like the rage. And Mickey quickly eclipsed Oswald and any of the other animated characters that were popular at the time. And Oswald really became a footnote by 1937, 38. They pretty much stopped making Oswald cartoons. And also, Oswald's design changed drastically when it left Disney and went to Charles Mintz and his Oswald studio. And then he only had it for a year. And then it went to Walter Lantz at Universal. And again, the design evolved, and not in a really good way, because by the time the Oswald cartoons disappeared in the late 30s, Oswald was starting to look like the Nesquik bunny.
We did find that we're doing some of our own research and we saw like I'm trying to think of the word, like a chronicle of how Oswald changed over the years, and he looks very different. I feel like certainly Mickey Mouse has changed, but overall you have a lot of the same design elements. But I was like, who is this brown bunny?
Yeah, and I think like with Mickey, yes, Mickey's design evolves through the 30s until you get to that sweet spot that the Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey that Fred Moore had designed. And to me, when you sort of look at that Mickey, he's a much more dimensional and, articulated character, with sort of elbows and knees and things, whereas the early Mickey is that rubber hose animation, of the arms and legs. But you can look at the Steamboat Willie Mickey and you can look at the Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey and go, okay, those are the same characters, but they've just evolved and got refined. You know what I mean? From Steamboat Willie to Sorcerer's Apprentice, the character's refined, but he still maintains the integrity of his look.
So when you were looking for these cartoons, you talk about this in your book, but I think this is so fascinating for our listeners. How does one start looking for lost cartoons in private collections and libraries across Europe?
Well, it's really about going to a lot of these different film archives and talking to the archivists. There was one title that was thought to have been a Felix the Cat title, when in fact it was an Oswald cartoon, so it was mislabeled. Other archives, they knew they had it, but it was sort of like it was in their inventory, but there was no urgency or need to say, hey, we've got an Oswald cartoon here, until we came knocking and said, hey, by the way, do you have any Oswald cartoons in your collection? And then they start looking, and that's really how some of this stuff came about.
We love to dive into the research process. I know finding them is a journey of its own. We think of, we've read different books, and the Walt Disney Archives and Animation Research Library come to mind, but they only had small bits of Oswald material. So how did you conduct research for a character who was owned by, another company, and as you shared, had kind of 3 different directors at the helm of it over time?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was, there was a certain amount of material in the Walt Disney Archives, and so that was a big help. And we were able to gather together some pieces of art and other artifacts from private collections and just people out there that had bits and pieces. And when you're doing a book like this, it really is about locating those people and seeing what they have and seeing if they were willing to share it or, give permission to use an image or a scan of something they had. And most people are very cooperative when it comes to those things because, these types of projects aren't big, revenue generators. They're about documenting, the history. And that's really what it boils down to. So that's, a big part of it. It's funny, each book that I do, they're kind of, some of the topics are obscure and they haven't been done before, but as soon as you let people know that you're working on something, you'd be surprised how many people come out of the woodwork and say, oh, so-and-so told me you're doing a book on X. And, gee, I have this stuff that I collected many years ago. And they show it to you and you're like, wow, I've never seen this before. Can I use some of this? And they're like, absolutely, and you give them the appropriate attribution, of course, for anything you use in the book. But, that's kind of the fun part about it because, the Disney fan base is a community, and when I, my latest book project that I'm working on that I just announced last month is on the House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's vision of tomorrow. And, again, as soon as I announced that, a bunch of people contacted me through social media and said, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And, I have these photos from when I was a kid and I have this and I collected that, and they're sharing stuff with you. And it's just absolutely wonderful, and it's really about aggregating all of that material and distilling it into, an engaging text and supported with photos and artwork and things like that.
That's really amazing. And you're right. The Disney community is a community. That's how we connected with you. So it's really incredible how writing a book that can feel daunting, you get all this support from people who are just as excited to read and learn about it as you are.
Exactly. And, and I find, look, I get people reaching out to me all the time through social media with questions and, advice on art schools and all kinds of stuff. And I try to respond to everybody. Unfortunately, it's not overwhelming, but, and I don't know what I'll do if it does become overwhelming. But right now, when I get the occasional note, I always, I always give a response.
So let's talk about these Oswald cartoons. I really enjoyed how you have them laid out chronologically from their release. I think that makes it really cool to see how Oswald has changed throughout the cartoons with his refining character design. But what is your favorite? And Courtney and I would love to talk to you about ours.
Well, it's always tough to lay down a favorite, but I have to say I really like Hungry Hobos and also Africa After Dark, and partially because both of those are near complete, and they also were 35 millimeter, so the resolution is really good on those, and so both are fun, but I will say that both have bits missing from them. It seems like a lot of the Oswald cartoons that we've found were edited. There were scenes taken out and things like that. So that's why early on, when you asked me about it, I said it's like 19 and a half, because I mean, the neck and neck, it's only a 2-minute section out of what would have been about a 7-minute cartoon.
Yeah, it was fun to revisit those. We need to get our hands on the treasure tin, but we were able to find some on YouTube, and I liked the first one, Poor Papa. I think, maybe I was just drawn to it because it was the first one chronicled in the book, though it wasn't the first one technically released. I just thought it to be a funny comic moment, and I kind of picked up on this as you discussed some of the gags within your synopsises. That there are similarities between some of the Oswald gags and then reused for later Mickey cartoons. And this felt like one that I do enjoy from Mickey's side as well, which is called Mickey's Nightmare, where Mickey becomes a father to many. So I think maybe because I liked that Mickey one, I was like, oh, I see where that inspiration came from.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Poor Papa because it was rejected by Universal. They had a whole bunch of notes, and they thought Oswald looked too old, and there's all kinds of things, and so Trolley Trouble was the first cartoon actually to go out into the theaters, but it was the second Oswald cartoon to be completed.
Emily, what was your favorite?
So I had a couple favorites, but two that stood out to me, I had realized after watching them that I was like, this just reminds me so much of some of my favorite Mickey cartoons. So one was All Wet, where he's at the beach and he's a hot dog vendor, and then we have his day at the beach. I guess I felt like a Coney Island almost type to me. Yeah. But some of the gags and the behavior reminded me so much of Mickey's Hawaiian Holiday.
Sure.
And that was one of my favorites. It's not exact, obviously, but there were the gags of like he's trying to row through the waves and he's cutting right through them in the rowboat. And I think Goofy does that with a surfboard. And then he's going up and down on the waves. And just some of the things I was like, or then he's dancing with another character. I was like, that reminds me so much of Mickey's Hawaiian Holiday, which I already love that short from Mickey.
Yeah. And I have to say, I just love the character Oswald, and
he's really fun.
He's fun, and he's like I don't know, he's like the Rolling Stones to Mickey Mouse's Beatles. You know what I mean? So.
I noted that, and a lot of my notes from watching it, I was like, I think we see so much Mickey in him, but really it's Mickey is Oswald because Oswald came first, and his resourcefulness, his mischievous, like little antics, and how he gets involved with the other characters or the silly ways he gets out of things. It is Mickey.
Yeah, no, without question. In fact, if you stood the characters side by side, you'll see that, if you had round ears on Oswald instead of the rabbit ears, it's basically the early Mickey. I think nowadays, if you had done something that close to a character, you'd probably get sued. But back then, it was sort of fast and loose. They were doing a lot of things, quickly, and there was sort of a wink and a nod to their competitors, back and forth between different artists and things like that. Because if you look at what Walt had done before Oswald, the Alice comedies, there was an animated cat in there called Julius. And Julius was Alice's sidekick. And towards the end of the Alice series, he was really starting to look like Felix the cat.
So another favorite that I had was Rival Romeos.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was a fun one.
Yeah, and Rival Romeos, there's a Mickey cartoon that's very similar.
I'm sensing a trend in myself that I keep pulling towards the ones that are very similar to Mickey cartoons. Maybe it's that nostalgia that you recognize watching them. But it's so funny for someone, I told Courtney in our last episode that I've always been fascinated with Oswald. I've had your book for a while now. I've read it, but I never actually went and watched the cartoons until recently. And I don't know why I never did. Even I had to find them on YouTube, but it was actually very easy. Even someone created a playlist and has them in chronological order all the way through even his time after Walt and the Disney brothers end up no longer producing Oswald. And I don't know why I never watched him for. He's such an enjoyable character.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think he's a fun character. I'm actually thrilled that they're doing some more stuff with him at the Walt Disney Company, including the walk-around character that they have down at California Adventure and Oswald's gas station and, all of that stuff. Look, I have said this before, if there might not be a Mickey Mouse if there wasn't an Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And, if Walt had continued making Oswald, or if Walt owned Oswald, he may never have created Mickey Mouse.
Since you mentioned that, I wanted to ask a question we had, having spent all this time. How do you feel about Walt's quote, "It all started with a mouse"? Because it seems to suggest it really all started with a rabbit.
Well, something, I think he had his huge success with Mickey Mouse. And after the issue with not having ownership of Oswald, he vowed to have to own his characters going forward. So, in a sense, it did start with Mickey, but in a tongue-in-cheek sort of way, when I've signed this book for people, I often put in, remember, it all started with a rabbit. Again, I think it did start with a mouse because of the fact that Walt owned Mickey Mouse, but Mickey Mouse wouldn't have been created if it wasn't for Oswald. So, it's one of those situations, and in a sense, it's just fun to talk about, but, it doesn't matter because he did create Mickey Mouse after he lost the contract for the Oswald cartoons, and he didn't look back and look at the massive company that he essentially created from that little mouse.
So from going off and getting to create Mickey Mouse and the success that would be Disney Studios, what was Oswald's career like after Mintz cut out Walt and he became solely Universal and Walt went his own way?
I think Oswald became an also-ran. I mean, he was, Mintz did the next 26 cartoons, and then Universal took it away from him and gave it to Walter Lantz. And, Walter Lantz did what Walter Lantz did, and the character changed. And no doubt there was a lot of executive input from Universal on do this, do that, change him, do this. I think they were trying to keep up with trends in the business and seeing what was popular and trying to mold Oswald to mirror some of that, and instead of just being his own character.
Yeah, it's so interesting to learn that he had, several cartoons after. We kind of think like, oh, they bought him, nothing really happened, but there was more. But we're glad that he has returned now.
I was going to say there was like 120 Oswald cartoons. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, that playlist that I found, there were some all the way through 30s. And you're right, I went and watched a couple. I can't remember the titles off the top of my head just because I wanted to see how he changed. And while it's fun to get Oswald in color, that was exciting. But yeah, he's not recognizable as Oswald that Walt created.
Yeah.
Very different character.
Absolutely, without question.
Well, today, as you alluded to, he has quite the following. I've had the chance to meet him in Disney's California adventure, and Emily will be headed to the Disneyland Resort for the first time next month. So I know she's hoping, fingers crossed, to spot him while she's there. But we'd love to know, why do you think so many people love Oswald today, even though many didn't know about him until he was reacquired in 2006?
I think he's a likable character. He's a simple character. I like his design. I just, feel like people gravitate to good design and to funny gags. And there's certainly plenty of funny gags in the Oswald cartoons.
I have a Wii sitting in my closet, and I kind of feel like I need to track down the Epic Mickey game and play it, because it looked like such a fun journey between those two characters, with Mickey and Oswald getting to, interact.
Yeah. I think that, when they did that Epic Mickey, the ability to do CG of some of these characters wasn't as good as it is today. And so, I did some consulting on that and gave notes, but some of the characters, I think, they don't really work as well. And part of that has to do with, these characters are designed for 2D and not for CG. In fact, they've done some CG Mickeys, and, there was a lot of issues with how Mickey's ears turn in space, because they really don't if you look at the animated cartoons from the 30s. The ears are either, at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, or, on his head, when he's looking at the camera, or they're tilted back when he turns his head to the side, and you get to cheat that kind of movement doing hand-drawn animation, and it works. But as soon as you try to do that in a dimensional 3D world, you start to run into some issues.
And I can imagine, especially with a video game, where you really need to see things from a lot of different points of view as you're moving through a world on the screen.
Yeah. So, and I think, all of those things are surmountable without question. I mean, especially today, the software advancements and techniques have really come a long way from when they did that Epic Mickey game. So I think if they had done something like that today, it would be vastly different.
Maybe it's time to revisit it.
I don't know. When they did Epic Mickey 2, it didn't do very well, and that was the end of it.
That's unfortunate. I feel like video games, especially in this, COVID time frame. I know I got a Nintendo Switch on March 20th, 2020. So it has been a big part for me. I'd love to see it released on that platform to play, but who knows? That's up to higher powers.
Yeah, exactly.
So after all of the cartoons in your book, you have an epilogue where, I believe there are 11 cartoons in your epilogue listed that are still lost since the publication of your book. Have there been any of those recovered?
Well, it's not. It wouldn't be 11. It's let's see. Some of these, and I'm looking at it since the book was done.
I'm sorry. My correction. There's 1, 2, 3, 7 that are lost and 4 that are still looking for more complete prints.
That's correct. Yeah, and it's really it's really 6 that are lost because, well, half. 6.5 that are lost because we do have a portion. We have a 2-minute portion of Neck and Neck, which is exciting. And we have found Sleigh Bells, but Sleigh Bells, again, is missing portions of, and same with Empty Socks. They're missing portions of the entirety of the cartoon. So. But something, I was kind of glad I was able to put this in the back of the book because there is the finding Oswald cartoons at gmail.com that people, if they think they have one, they can email us. And that's exactly what happened with Neck and Neck. I got an email through that from the gentleman that owned the cartoon in Japan. And he had my book. And he was looking because the Neck and Neck cartoon he had a title card on it called Speedy Mickey, and it was this kind of grotesque drawing of Mickey Mouse. It was like off model, but it was called Speedy Mickey, and the guy bought it in 1950, and he kept it all these years. And he got my Oswald book, and he was reading the Oswald book. And when he got to Neck and Neck, he was reading the synopsis, and he said, "Wait a second, I think this may be my Speedy Mickey cartoon." And that's why they reached out to me, and then they sent me a QuickTime movie of what they had, and sure enough, it's absolutely Oswald, and it matches up to the synopsis of the film.
That's awesome that you were able to find it. I found it so interesting that I think a few of them were listed. I'm probably going to get the term wrong, but like for home use. And I'm just so shocked that people had 35 millimeter.
Well, no, they actually were making 16 millimeter prints.
Okay.
And then it was like that era's version of home
VHS.
entertainment. You get a 16 millimeter print, you thread it through your 16 millimeter projector, and you project it on the wall or onto a movie screen, and you'd watch these silent cartoons.
That's fun for me to read because Emily and I are of the age that, we came up during the VHS home video boom, all the things releasing from the vault. But this really was a vault within people's homes.
Yeah. And that's why I'm very optimistic that some of the lost cartoons will surface, probably as these 16 millimeter prints that were, people would rent or buy in the 30s, 40s, 50s, to look at home. So I'm relatively optimistic that there'll be more coming along at some point.
Well, our fingers are crossed for you, and I don't know what our reach is, but maybe, just maybe, it'll help. I was thinking, though, Disney really likes to lean into the anniversary and birthday celebrations, and as we mentioned in the beginning, September will be a 95th anniversary for him. What do you think would be a fitting celebration?
Honestly, I have no idea what they would do. I think there's certainly things that I would do to celebrate Oswald, like, doing a live orchestration to a bunch of the cartoons, which we've done over the years. I think it would be really great to revive something like that and put together a screening at a movie palace, where you could have a 28-piece orchestra on stage with a big movie screen above the orchestra, and they play live to the cartoons. These kinds of silent cartoons lend themselves to that kind of show. You could do something at the El Capitan in Hollywood that Disney owns and has a big Wurlitzer organ, so you could have maybe a smaller amount of players with the Wurlitzer organ playing live to these cartoons. I think it would be a lot of fun.
That'd be a great tribute to bring him back to the silent era and really watch Oswald the way he was meant to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely, without question. And those kinds of programs are real experiences, I think, for an audience. I've gone to quite a number of them out here in Los Angeles, where they have an orchestra playing live to a Charlie Chaplin film or a Buster Keaton film, or I was involved with putting together a number of programs where we had a conductor and a small orchestra on stage playing to a series of animated shorts, and it's just a wonderful thing for people to have as an experience of going out to one of these old style movie palaces.
But given our current age of streaming, do you think Oswald could have a home on Disney Plus one day?
I would think. I mean, I don't know why they're not doing much with it. I do know they're trying to make some new Oswald shorts in the vein of those new Mickey shorts.
So fun.
That's what I've heard. But I'm sort of not plugged into what they're doing with Oswald at the company since I left.
That would be really cool to see those. We love the newer Mickey shorts. They're such a delight. I feel like they're in the spirit of those originals, but updated for today. So I saw his cameo in one of them.
Yeah, I absolutely love the design of those classic characters in that animation style.
I believe there's one where Mickey is called to take out a bunch of trash for his neighbor, and when he's digging through the pile of trash, he accidentally shovels out Oswald. So a very brief cameo, but a cute one.
I love it. It's terrific.
Before we wrap up and give you a chance to share what's current or next for you, we do have 2 questions that we ask of all of our authors who come on the show. So first, what is some advice that you want to leave with future writers or authors?
Well, look, writing is an art form. It's something that you have to do constantly, and it's a lot of hard work. Writing is all about rewriting. So, I often do anywhere from 6 to 10 rewrites of my manuscripts for any one of my books, because you really have to continue to work at constructing your story and your sentences, and just making them crisp and readable and engaging. So writing is a lot of hard work. So anybody who thinks that they're just going to sit down and first time out just bang out a book, you're not. It doesn't work that way. So in fact, I have to tell you, after I think I wrote 2 or 3 books, I actually went into the UCLA Writers Program, and I wound up getting a certificate in creative nonfiction and a certificate in fiction writing. And I felt that was hugely helpful for me in improving my writing style and my voice.
Emily and I both met as undergraduate teaching assistants for an English composition class, so you are preaching to the choir here for sure.
There you go. Yeah, you guys know. I mean,
I always think that's good advice. As a teacher, always telling my students, there's always more to learn. even like you said, you had already written 3 books and you went and found more to learn and to refine your craft and take in and hear and learn from others. So there's always more to learn. I love that advice.
And I often tell people that the moment you think you know it all, you're dead in the water, because you really, life is a journey of learning and doing new things and constantly stretching your boundaries. So you really have to take the stance that you don't know everything, that there's always new things to learn, and that's what keeps it fresh.
So the last question we always have for our authors, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit sits on our bookshelf and has been a wonderful addition, and we love him. So what's a favorite book Disney related that's on your shelf?
Oh my gosh. Something, this is really a hard one because I have so many books. I literally have thousands of books. I love books. I have tons of books. Every time I start a book project, I buy tons of books that are on related topics or have some tidbit of information in it that I need to reference, and I want to keep those books. So it's tough for me to say what is my favorite Disney book. I guess really the book that I will say is my favorite is Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas's Illusion of Life. The Disney animation book that they did decades ago that explains the Disney animation process. That's probably my favorite book because I consider it the Bible of Disney animation.
Very nice.
Courtney, I think we have more books to add to our bookshelf.
We always do. That's why we ask that question. I was going to say I've seen the Frank and Ollie documentary, but we haven't explored their books. So our shelves are growing.
Yeah, and the book is constantly in print because I think there's a paperback version of it that you'll easily be able to find at your favorite online retailer or bookstore, independent bookstore would be able to order it for you. That I would say is probably the foundational book for anybody who wants to understand Disney animation.
Perfect. Well, we always like to leave our listeners with additional resources to grow their shelves as well. And as I mentioned, you've published several books on Disney history, and we'd love for you to tell us more about your latest publication, Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland, From Toad Hall to the Haunted Mansion and Beyond. And I'll give a quick plug for our podcast pal, Brett, who I believe you got to speak to about that as well.
Brett Nachman, yes. Yeah, he's awesome. He's a wonderful guy. So Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland, From Toad Hall to the Haunted Mansion and Beyond. It's a mouthful. That was, again, very serendipitous how that came together. I actually knew Claude Coats back when I was first starting my career at Disney. He was kind of in the twilight of his career. And I got to know him over about an 18-month period before he retired. And then sadly, he passed away about a year after he retired. But you fast forward to, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a conference and I actually didn't even run into him. He was walking towards me, this very tall gentleman with a baseball cap, and he saw my name badge and he said, "Dave Bossert, I got your Dolly and Disney book at Barnes & Noble." Uh-huh. And I was just like so thrilled that my book was at Barnes & Noble. And I caught his name badge and it said Alan Coates. And I thought, I wonder if he's Claude Coates' son. And by that point, he had walked past me, and I went and tracked down somebody I knew and asked if Alan Coates was around and if he could introduce me. And he had gone home not feeling well. And so this mutual friend of ours put us together via email, and Alan and I wound up having lunch together. And I just wanted to tell Alan that I knew his father, and I had some stories I wanted to tell Alan about, and how gracious his dad was and kind to me and all of that. And by the end of the lunch, Alan looked at me and he said, "Would you be interested in writing a book on my father?" And I hadn't thought about it up until that point because I just really wanted to tell Alan what a great guy his dad was. And I just looked at Alan and I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd do that." So that's how this book came about. And I couldn't have done the book actually without Alan Coates and his family, because I really had, a complete open book to their archive, the family archive. And Alan, to his credit, had really saved a tremendous amount of material related to his father and his father's career at Disney. So it was really, really great. And I was able to do a lot of interviews with people that knew Claude, including Tony Baxter, who actually was mentored by Claude Coates. And Alan and I wound up doing what we believe is the last interview that Marty Sklar did before he passed away. Alan and I went up to Marty's house and sat with him for a couple of hours and just recorded a whole interview of him talking about Claude Coates. And so there was a lot of really terrific stories and information that we were able to use in the book for that. So the book actually is on its second printing. I know a lot of people are having trouble finding copies of it, but I assure your listeners and you both that there will be more Claude Coates books available, I believe, next month, mid to end of April, I think is when they're supposed to come in. But it's already on a second printing, which is fantastic.
That is really exciting. I know Courtney and I have it on our wish lists to get as well. But we talked about your book, and we've name dropped it a few times: Dolly and Disney, Destino, the story, artwork, and friendship behind the legendary film. We recently did an episode on our show here about that relationship between Walt Disney and Salvador Dali. So what can you tell us briefly about your time and research on that project?
Well, I actually, again, this is one of those moments where I was part of the team that completed Destino in 2002. And so I was intimately involved in that completion process, and really knew where all the information was. And there were some issues surrounding the artwork that the legal department was able to clear up. And once that was cleared up, I just went and said, I want to do this as a book. And publishing said, we want you. This is fantastic. Let's do it as a book. And so I was in a good position where I could get all of the artwork, access to the artwork. I also was able to go over and do research at the Gala and Salvador Dali Foundation and Museum in Figueres, Spain, and found some additional artifacts and letters and things between Dali and Walt. Actually a handful of drawings that were in some of Dali's sketchbooks that are related to the Destino project. So it was really great to be able to put together the story really from start to finish on the project, which really at that point spanned about 58 years.
There were so many great just little artifacts in that book. I particularly liked learning that Salvador Dali was, I believe, the president of Walt Disney's Railroad, or he had
Walt Disney made him vice president.
Vice president, that's what it was.
Of the Carrollwood Pacific.
Yes, his little railroad in his backyard. He had a whole certificate.
He had a little pass that Walt had signed, and with a fountain pen. It was really kind of fun.
I thought that was very sweet.
And that letter and the pass to ride the Fairweather route was something that I found over in Spain. So they didn't even have copies of that at the Walt Disney archives.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing those additional details. If you don't mind, we're going to let our listeners know what's next for us this month. Celebrating Women's History Month has become a tradition on our show, and we're excited to continue to do so with our second selection for this month. We are eagerly awaiting our Amazon pre-orders of Women of Walt Disney Imagineering. 12 women reflect on their trailblazing theme park careers, published by Disney Editions. So here's that product description. Quote, "A dozen female engineers recount their trailblazing careers, capturing an era and preserving the stories they have told their daughters, their mentees, their husbands, and their friends. A dozen women Imagineers have written personal stories from their decades designing and building the Disney worldwide empire of theme parks. Illustrated with the women's personal drawings and photos in addition to archival Imagineering images, the book represents a broad swath of Imagineering's creative disciplines during a time of unprecedented expansion. Intertwined with memories of Disney legends are glimpses of what it takes behind the scenes to create a theme park and the struggles unique to women who were becoming more and more important, visible, and powerful in a workplace that was overwhelmingly male. Each chapter is unique from a unique Imagineer's perspective and experience. These women spent their careers telling stories in 3 dimensions for the public. Now they've assembled their stories in print with the hope that their experience will continue to entertain and illuminate." End quote. So our copies are hopefully arriving soon, and we expect to have our episode ready for all of you by the end of next month. In the meantime, you can keep up with Book of the Mouse Club on Twitter and Instagram at Book of the Mouse. Email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. And please be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others can find our podcast and read and listen along with us. You can keep up with me, Courtney, on Instagram at GreatGuthsby and Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can follow me, Emily, on Instagram and Twitter at Emily_McD. And Dave, where can our listeners connect with you? And of course, where's the best place to buy your books?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You can go to davidbossert.com. And that is my official author website, and I have a lot of free material. There's articles that people can read for free that I've written over the years, including some stuff on Oswald and Mickey and some of the Disney World War II period. That there's about 60 articles up. There's also a book page that shows all of my books. If you click on any one of the books, there's links to your favorite online retailers. And I also like to give a shout out to independent bookstores, because any one of my books can be ordered by your local bookstore. It may take a little longer to come in, but you know what? Support your local bookstore if you can, your independent bookstores. So davidbossert.com, and there's also links to all of my social media. Because you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, all of those platforms you can certainly find. There's some 1 minute, what I call documinutes on the website, so you can see some small short documentaries for on Kem Weber and other things that I've put together. So I think it's a fairly robust website that people can find a lot of material. There's also a link to my podcast, which is the Skull Rock podcast that I do with Al John Go. And so that's it, davidbossert.com. And then I do want to point out that I announced a month ago that I am doing a new book called The House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of Tomorrow. And I'm doing a pre-order campaign on Indiegogo. So if you go to Indiegogo.com and just do a search for the House of the Future book, I have a bunch of different perks, but you can pre-order a book and reserve your author-signed copy now. The book is going to come out next year, and this is, again, some of these books are short runs, meaning that there aren't a lot of them created. So this is a great way to reserve your own copy now.
Well, we will be sure to include all of those in our show notes and link them there. And as our special guest to close us out, we always have our authors leave us with a quote. What have you picked to share with us today?
Well, you know something, if you go to my Facebook page, I used to have a quote up there, and I don't think, it's still there. And my quote to leave you with is called "Make it count. choke the life out of every day. And I like to say that because, once we get through a day, it's gone. You can't get it back. So get the most out of every day. And I like to say choke the life out of every day.
I like that a lot, and we're so glad we can make the most out of today by having you join us. So thank you again for your time, your insights, and the wealth of knowledge that you've brought to the Disney community through this book and many others.
Emily and Courtney, it was my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Thanks again, and listeners, until next time, I hope we never forget it was all started by a rabbit.
The Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.